It was supposed to be a quiet afternoon at Windsor. No cameras, just Prince William reviewing personal items once belonging to his mother, Princess Diana. Most items were familiar until a small, velvet-lined jewelry box appeared, recently discovered in storage. William instantly recognized it from childhood. His mother's favorite pieces had once filled it. After her death, it had vanished. Opening it brought memories flooding back, but something felt wrong. Pieces were missing, items rearranged, and a familiar bracelet replaced with a fake. William's pulse quickened as a chilling question rose in his mind. Who had tampered with his mother's belongings, and why? Later that evening, William sat alone in his private study at Kensington Palace. The jewelry box opened before him. Outside, the sky hung gray, spring rain tapping softly against the windows. Inside, the atmosphere was charged, not with grief, but with suspicion. He lifted the pieces one by one, inspecting them carefully. Some were unmistakably real. The brooch Diana wore to the 1993 breast cancer charity gala, the sapphire ring she'd once joked about losing in a hotel sink. But others, something was off. The gold bracelet that had once adorned her wrist on their trip to Balmoral, the one he had personally held onto as a boy, was here in form, but not in spirit. The weight was wrong. The engraving was dull, slightly crooked. The diamonds, once brilliant, looked flat. He knew instinctively it was a replica. And it wasn't the only one. In the lower tier of the box, a necklace Diana had worn at the 1996 Met Gala, featured in dozens of international magazines, was gone entirely. In its place was a thin piece of black velvet, as if it had been hastily removed in the empty space disguise. That's when William noticed something wedged beneath the lining, a torn envelope, yellowed with age. He carefully pulled it out. It was addressed in his mother's familiar script. For William, when the time is right, the date on the back read, August 1997. His breath caught. The envelope was half empty, as if something had been removed or stolen. But what remained was a single folded note, just a few lines. Part of the ink had faded, but the words that were still visible made his chest tighten. You may not understand now, but this is meant for you. Protect what's yours. William leaned back in his chair, the note trembling in his hands. The memory of Diana's voice flooded his mind. She had tried to warn him. This wasn't about lost jewelry anymore. It was about a betrayal hidden in silken gold. And the more he stared into the box, the clearer it became. Someone in the palace had been hiding something for a very long time. William returned to the box the next morning, more alert than before. It no longer felt like a collection of memories. It felt like a puzzle, deliberately altered and dangerously incomplete. One by one, he listed the missing pieces from memory. He knew Diana's collection well. She had let him study it as a child, telling him stories behind each item. The absence of certain items now seemed far too specific to be accidental. The sapphire pendant from the 1996 Met Gala, gone. Her favorite engraved cufflink, a gift from her father, missing. A diamond tennis bracelet she had worn during her final summer in France, no sign of it. Then came the realization that chilled him most. Someone hadn't just stolen items, they had replaced them. A thin bangle, meant to mimic one of Diana's originals, had a hallmark dated 2008, over a decade after her death. Another piece bore the name of a jeweler in Mayfair, known for high-end replicas. Someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to make it look like nothing had changed. But why? And who had access to the jewelry in the years since her passing? His mind turned toward the only people who had unrestricted access to both Diana's private effects and royal storage over the last 2 decades: the senior staff, trusted archivists, and members of the royal family. He recalled conversations over the years, faint remarks from longtime staffers, whispers of Queen Camilla taking an active interest in Diana's belongings during early renovations at Clarence House. At the time, it had seemed harmless, organizational, respectful. Now William wasn't so sure. His mother had warned him to protect what was his. That meant these pieces weren't simply heirlooms. They were meant to stay with her sons. And if they were taken, someone in the family had violated more than just protocol. They had crossed a sacred boundary. For William, it wasn't only about recovering stolen property, it was about restoring his mother's voice and facing the possibility that the betrayal came from within the palace walls. 3 days after discovering the jewelry box, Prince William arranged a quiet meeting at Windsor. No aides, no formal briefing, just a trusted former archivist who had served during his mother's final years. The man, now retired, arrived discreetly through the side entrance, unaware of the emotional storm waiting inside. William greeted him with warmth, but little small talk. He placed 3 items on the table: the replica bracelet, the altered brooch, and the half-torn envelope. "Tell me everything you remember about the storage transition in 1998, William said quietly. The man's expression tightened. He recalled that after Diana's passing, her personal belongings were divided. Some sent to Althorpe, others held temporarily at Clarence House. Security was light, documentation was inconsistent. And there had been a period between late 1998 and early 2000 where Diana's effects were moved several times. I was told Queen Camilla had taken a personal interest in preserving Diana's items properly," the archivist said, hesitant. "She oversaw the re-cataloging herself for a while." William raised his eyebrows. "Was there oversight?" The man shook his head. "Not really. Back then, it wasn't questioned." It aligned too well with what William feared, that someone with power and privacy had the opportunity to remove, replace, or even destroy pieces of Diana's personal legacy without anyone ever noticing. He then asked about the missing pendant and the strange note. The archivist paused. "I remember the pendant clearly. There was a photo taken during the original inventory. If it's gone now, it was taken later, long after her death." The implication hung in the air. William sat in silence. He didn't want to accuse. Not yet, but the clues were stacking fast, too fast. The emotional weight of his mother's memory collided with a truth he hadn't been ready to face, that for over 20 years, someone in the royal family may have tampered with the last physical connection he had to her. And if that someone was Camilla, this wasn't just a mistake, it was betrayal. That evening, after the archivist left, William sat alone in his study at Adelaide Cottage. The jewelry box opened once again in front of him. The palace was quiet. The rain outside tapped steadily against the windows, soft but unrelenting, like the memories he was trying not to drown in. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His silence said enough. Inside the box, everything felt smaller now, fragile, not just because pieces were missing, but because each one seemed to carry weight it hadn't before, a story unfinished, a gesture frozen in time. He picked up the torn note again, its faded handwriting whispering across the decades. "For William, when the time is right." Had she known? Was she afraid? He hadn't read those words since he was 15. Back then, grief was too heavy to allow reflection. Now it was different. Now there was anger beneath it, and disbelief. His mother had tried to protect something sacred, and for 26 years her message had been hidden from him. How many decisions had he made without knowing her final thoughts? How many pieces of her legacy had been quietly chipped away, repackaged, or rewritten under the pretense of order? Across the room, a portrait of Diana rested above the fireplace. William looked at it, eyes locked. He wanted to speak, but the words never came. Only a slow, steady tear traced down his cheek. This wasn't about royal tradition anymore. It was about justice. Not in headlines or courtrooms, but in truth. A truth denied to him for over 2 decades. Kate entered quietly, having waited all evening to give him space. She didn't speak either. Instead, she sat beside him, gently placing her hand on his. Together, they stared at the open jewelry box, knowing the reality it had just revealed. There were still no answers. But for the first time, William realized the road ahead wouldn't be about revenge. It would be about reclaiming what was rightfully theirs. And this time, he would not stay silent. Word travels quickly inside palace walls, even when spoken in whispers. By the following morning, senior aides at both Kensington Palace and Clarence House were aware that Prince William had reopened the case of Diana's missing personal effects. No formal announcement had been made, but the signs were unmistakable. Records were being requested, archival staff were being questioned, and access to private royal storage was being temporarily frozen. At Buckingham Palace, a quiet meeting was held between King Charles and his most trusted advisors. Though no accusations had been made, the implications were clear. William believed something was wrong, and Camilla's name was surfacing behind closed doors more frequently than anyone was comfortable admitting. Charles, known for his reluctance to stir public controversy, reportedly responded with visible tension. "He's grieving again," one aide overheard him say. "Let's not turn this into a tribunal." But it was already too late for discretion. Camilla, who had just returned from a solo engagement in Norfolk, was pulled aside by her private secretary and briefed. According to insiders, her face dropped when the jewelry box was mentioned. She didn't respond immediately, just stared out the window for several long moments. Later that afternoon, she requested a list of all royal items currently in her possession, an unusual move that only added fuel to internal speculation. Behind the scenes, the atmosphere inside the palace was rapidly shifting. Staffers who had worked during the early 2000s were being contacted. A few, now retired, were asked to recall specific events involving Princess Diana's belongings. Some remembered packing crates. Others recalled vague orders to redirect certain boxes. None could explain why a personal jewelry case was never logged in official records after 1998. It wasn't a scandal yet, but it was no longer a secret either. And for the first time in years, the palace wasn't just managing history, it was being forced to confront it. Everyone inside the royal household understood. If William was digging, he wouldn't stop until he unearthed the truth. Camilla didn't wait for an official inquiry to begin. By the next evening, she quietly summoned her two closest advisors to her private sitting room at Clarence House. No press, no staff, just one question hanging in the air. Has William told the king everything? The advisors exchanged glances before confirming, yes. William had shown Charles what he found in the box, the torn letter, the missing items, the replacements that didn't belong. Camilla sat back in her chair, her expression unreadable. For several minutes, she said nothing. Finally, in a low voice, she broke the silence. I didn't steal anything. I kept it safe. According to those present, Camilla began recounting the events of the late 1990s. After Diana's death, she said, a number of personal belongings, including photographs, jewelry, and keepsakes, were left in various royal residences during a chaotic transition of storage. One such item, she claimed, was the jewelry box. It was left behind at Highgrove, she explained. No label, no instruction, no one seemed to know what to do with it. Camilla insisted that she never meant to take the box for herself. Instead, she said, she had moved it to a locked drawer in her dressing room to prevent it being misplaced while staff reorganized the archives. What she failed to explain, however, was why no one had been informed. Not William, not palace archivists, and not even Charles. And why, over the years, had several items within the box reportedly appeared at quiet family gatherings or in photographs taken at private events. When pressed further about the sapphire pendant and altered bracelet, Camilla offered only vague responses. The pendant, I thought it had been gifted to the royal collection. I had no idea it was Diana's. As for the bracelet, she admitted it had been replaced after being damaged, but claimed she did not authorize the switch herself. By the end of the conversation, one advisor described her tone as more weary than defensive. Another said she looked genuinely frightened, not of being exposed, but of being misunderstood. Yet to those who heard her version of events, something still didn't sit right. The timelines were blurred, the memories too selective. And in the court of public perception, especially with Diana's son involved, good intentions might not be enough. Because in this family, the line between protection and possession is razor thin. As Camilla's version of events quietly made its way through palace channels, not everyone was convinced. There were cracks, not just in her story, but in the memories of those who had lived through that era. And as palace aides, archivists, and longtime staff were pulled into hushed interviews and informal debriefs, the inconsistencies began to mount. One senior staff member, now semi-retired, recalled a conversation from 2006 in which Camilla had allegedly described a sapphire pendant as too flashy for a duchess. At the time, it was dismissed as harmless opinion, but that pendant was later identified by Prince William as one of Diana's most iconic heirlooms, the same piece missing from the rediscovered jewelry box. A former royal dresser told investigators that she distinctly remembered seeing a blue velvet case in Camilla's wardrobe during a 2010 holiday at Burke Hall. She didn't open it, of course, but said, "It didn't belong there. It looked old, and I knew it wasn't hers." Other witnesses described informal moments where Camilla wore jewelry pieces with murky provenance. A sapphire brooch at a private reception in 2011, a diamond-studded bracelet during a weekend retreat at Balmoral. There was never a public record of those items being officially passed to her from Diana's collection. And then came the most troubling revelation. A handwritten note was found inside a filing envelope at Clarence House dated February 1999 from a junior aide to a senior royal advisor. It mentioned in passing the princess's items, some of which the Duchess has in temporary custody. It was buried in paperwork and never formally logged. That single line proved what William feared. The palace had known all along. Even if Camilla believed she was preserving Diana's items, it appeared she had done so privately, without consent or transparency. And now, more than 2 decades later, that secrecy was starting to look like something else entirely. "It's not the jewelry," said one palace source. "It's the silence, the secrets. That's what hurt the most." William, upon hearing these developments, reportedly grew quieter, more resolved. He wasn't seeking revenge, but he could no longer accept vague apologies and paper-thin excuses. He wanted the truth, fully, clearly, and without conditions. Because if his mother's memory had been mishandled, even unintentionally, someone had to say it. And if no one else would, it would have to be him. By late January 2024, Prince William could no longer ignore the weight of what he had uncovered. The jewelry box wasn't just a forgotten keepsake. It had become a symbol of betrayal, memory, and unresolved legacy. And while the palace had long relied on discretion to preserve its image, William quietly decided it was time to break that cycle. But not through press conferences or public accusations. He would launch an internal investigation of his own. According to palace insiders, William held a private meeting with two of his most trusted aides in the Green Drawing Room at Kensington Palace. The instruction was simple but bold. Trace everything. Every piece, every movement, every signature that touched Diana's personal collection between 1997 and 2010. The team was small, consisting of 3 longtime royal archivists, 1 digital forensics consultant, and a legal liaison. Their assignment: locate original records, examine storage documentation, and cross-reference photographs and receipts, especially those linked to Clarence House, Highgrove, and any estate where Camilla had lived or visited frequently during that time. Within days, irregularities surfaced. Records showed that in early 1998, several boxes of Diana's personal belongings, labeled as unassigned legacy, had been moved from Kensington Palace to a temporary storage unit on the outskirts of London. The boxes were intended to be reviewed and catalogued by royal archivists, but no follow-up documentation existed beyond a vague items relocated to private residence, note scrawled in pencil, that residence, Highgrove, and the person who signed off on the transfer, a now retired staffer who had served directly under Camilla. Even more disturbing, digital records from 2004 revealed a series of insurance adjustments for royal jewelry, including valuation appraisals conducted on items matching the description of Diana's missing pieces. The request came from an unnamed senior member of the household. Though the name was redacted, the email domain traced back to Clarence House. William's team quietly expanded their investigation. A royal jeweler was brought in to verify replicas and evaluate modifications. The results confirmed what William already suspected. Several pieces had been altered post-2005, including swapped stones, replaced clasps, and settings inconsistent with Diana's original preferences. One piece, a diamond bracelet, had undergone a complete reset in 2009. The receipt was found in a private account tied to Household of the Duchess of Cornwall. The evidence was stacking up. It wasn't loud, but it was undeniable. This was no longer a mystery, it was a trail. And at the end of that trail stood someone who may have believed time and silence would bury the truth, but not this time. The confrontation didn't come with fireworks, it wasn't public, and there were no shouting matches or slammed doors. But inside the walls of Clarence House, what unfolded between Prince William and Queen Camilla was one of the most emotionally charged moments in recent royal memory. It happened in early February 2024, following a family luncheon arranged under the guise of post-Christmas reconciliation. King Charles was said to be present for the first half of the gathering, but William had made arrangements for a private word with Camilla afterward, alone and without aides. According to palace sources, the meeting took place in the Duchess's private sitting room. William arrived with a small portfolio in hand, not a press statement or formal accusation, but a collection of photographs, item logs, receipts, and a faded envelope. The same one that once held his mother's handwritten message dated 1997. Camilla reportedly sat in silence as William began laying out what he had discovered. His tone was calm but unmistakably direct. He recounted the odd inconsistencies: the reappearing jewelry box, the missing pieces, the replica bracelet, and the sapphire pendant altered and appraised under her household's name. "You knew these weren't yours to wear," William reportedly said, "and yet they kept showing up." At first, Camilla did not respond, but when she did, her voice was quiet, almost trembling. According to an insider familiar with the meeting, she said, "I never intended to keep them. I didn't know how to return them without creating scandal." William didn't raise his voice, but he pressed harder. "Scandal?" he asked, "or accountability?" The emotional weight of the conversation deepened when William produced the hidden letter from Diana. It was short but powerful. Camilla reportedly read it in full, pausing halfway through before placing it back in the envelope. "She wanted these protected," William told her. "Instead, they vanished, and now I'm left to explain why." Camilla attempted to justify her actions, suggesting some pieces had been misplaced, others stored improperly. She denied malice but admitted she may have overstepped in handling what she called a delicate legacy. But for William, the issue wasn't just about misplaced heirlooms. It was about trust, and the fact that Diana's last message had been hidden for decades. By the end of the conversation, no resolution had been reached, but a line had been drawn. According to one royal source, William left Clarence House that afternoon with the envelope back in his possession, and without so much as a handshake. The silence that followed wasn't just tension, it was transformation. By late February 2024, the tension that had been simmering quietly behind palace walls began to leak into public view. There was no official statement, no dramatic exposé, but royal watchers and journalists who'd followed the monarchy for decades began noticing the subtle signs. And nothing in the royal household is ever truly subtle. It started with appearances. Camilla, once a regular presence at public charity events and diplomatic receptions, was notably absent from two back-to-back royal engagements. First, she pulled out of a scheduled visit to a literacy foundation in Bristol. Then a high-profile garden reception for foreign dignitaries at Clarence House went ahead without her. The official reason cited personal scheduling conflicts, but insiders whispered that something was deeply off. The timing wasn't lost on the media. By March, whispers turned into headlines. "The Queen Consort retreats from public eye," read one article in the Times. A more biting piece in the Daily Mirror asked, "Where is Camilla?" Social media erupted with speculation, some guessing illness, others assuming internal drama. And though the palace tried to maintain the usual composure, their silence only made things louder. Meanwhile, William and Catherine were stepping into the spotlight like never before. They attended a series of community initiatives in Leeds, spoke candidly about mental health during a televised event, and visited a children's hospital in Liverpool, where Catherine's tender moment with a terminally ill child became an instant viral image. In stark contrast, Camilla's absence was being interpreted not as rest, but retreat. And then came the brooch. At a private fundraising gala on March 12th, Camilla reappeared, but eagle-eyed viewers noticed something striking. She wore no jewelry, not a brooch, not a pendant, not even her usual pearl earrings. The Queen Consort, known for her elegant accessories, stood unadorned. Royal commentators quickly connected the dots. Was this an intentional move? A quiet admission? One former royal stylist told Hello magazine, "It's highly unusual. Every appearance is planned, and jewelry is chosen with great care. For her to wear nothing, that's a message." Behind closed doors, the palace communications team was reportedly in disarray. Several internal proposals to release a soft clarification, perhaps even a vague statement about archival mix-ups, were rejected. King Charles was said to be deeply torn, urging calm and urging William to avoid stoking further division. But the image was already burned into the public's mind. A queen without her jewels, a son carrying his mother's final letter, and a future king determined not to let history repeat itself. The monarchy had not yet cracked in public, but the surface was showing unmistakable fractures. The turning point came on April 2nd, 2024. It was a gray, drizzling afternoon at Sandringham House, the king's preferred retreat for private family discussions. But this was no casual gathering. It was a planned, tightly controlled meeting between King Charles and Prince William, and the weight of the crown itself hung in the air. According to palace insiders, Charles had called for the meeting in response to mounting internal pressure. The silence surrounding the jewelry box scandal was becoming impossible to sustain. The monarchy's most senior aides had warned him. Doing nothing was now more dangerous than doing something. William arrived early, carrying a leather-bound folder with Diana's note, archival logs, photographs of the replica items, and a private letter from Catherine in support of his position. It was the culmination of weeks of private inquiry, heartbreak, and reflection. Charles reportedly began the meeting with measured concern. He had read Diana's note. He had seen the press. But he also wanted to preserve peace. "She meant a great deal to us both," he said, referencing Diana. The first time in years, according to a source, he'd spoken so openly about her legacy. But William didn't want words. He wanted action. "I am not here for revenge," he reportedly told his father, "but I will not protect silence anymore." The heir to the throne then laid out his proposal. It wasn't explosive. It was measured, constitutional, and deeply strategic. First, all personal items belonging to Princess Diana would be removed from any shared royal inventory and placed in a separate secure vault under the stewardship of Prince William and the Duke of Sussex jointly, even if Harry never returned to royal duty. Second, Queen Camilla would quietly return any disputed items, no statement, no blame. but their absence would be noted, and future appearances would reflect that. Third, a formal update to royal property records would list Diana's heirlooms as non-transferable, permanently assigned to her sons and their direct descendants. Charles sat in silence for several minutes before responding. "You realize this sets a precedent," he said softly. William nodded. "One I'm prepared to defend." Perhaps the most difficult moment came near the end. Charles reportedly asked if this meant Camilla's public role would diminish. William's answer was careful, but firm. "She remains queen consort, but she cannot stand in the place of someone she tried to erase." By the end of the meeting, Charles agreed. A discreet memo was issued to the royal household staff the next morning, April 3rd, under the heading Restoration Directive. Camilla's access to archived items was suspended. Certain pieces were quietly returned to storage. Her upcoming engagements would continue, but with a lighter presence. There was no public statement, no apology. But within the palace, a silent shift had begun. For William, it wasn't a victory, it was justice. The kind his mother had waited 27 years for. And for Camilla, it marked the beginning of a quieter chapter, one where the past would never be fully forgotten. In the end, there was no grand announcement, no flashbulbs, no viral press release, but something had changed. The quiet return of Diana's belongings, the subtle absence of Camilla's jewelry, the softened language in palace briefings, all whispered the same truth. The past had finally been acknowledged. For years, Diana's legacy had lived in memory and myth, in photographs, in charity causes, in the quiet way her sons carried themselves. But now it had also returned in the tangible. A brooch, a pendant, a handwritten note tucked beneath velvet. It was no longer just a memory, it was protected. And William? He didn't speak to the press. He didn't give interviews. But those close to him say something shifted in his posture, a quiet resolve, a steadier presence. He had defended not only his mother's legacy, but his wife's dignity and the integrity of the monarchy itself. Not with scandal, but with quiet power, with restraint, with truth. Camilla remained by the king's side, but her role had changed. Public, reserved, carefully managed. The crown still glimmered, but the silence surrounding it had broken. And Catherine? She stood tall, with poise, with purpose. She wore Diana's sapphire brooch during a hospital visit later that spring. Not as a statement, but as a symbol, a reminder that legacy is not in what's worn, but in what's carried. For the public, one thing had become clear. This wasn't just a royal drama, it was a reckoning with grief, with history, with the hidden wounds behind the palace gates. And through it all, the people chose their side, not through noise, but through faith. Faith in a future queen who leads with grace. Faith in a future king who honors the past without being imprisoned by it. The monarchy didn't fall, but it changed. And somewhere in a quiet vault, Diana's jewelry box remains, restored, protected, whole again. Just like the memory of the woman who once held it.